Hi everybody, this is Tim Poitevin, member of the timsphotos.com Academy Facebook group. I'm going to do a video for you today about how I like to use Lightroom in combination with Photoshop to do my editing. I do all of my basic edits in Lightroom, and for the most part, it gets me to completed photos probably 90 or 95% of the time. But for that extra little push, sometimes I need to go into Photoshop to do some more advanced features. Today I'm going to show you the high pass filter to do some great sharpening, and I'm going to show you the content aware fill that I can use to actually replace portions of the image much easier than using the clone tool. Now, I should say before I begin here, I am not the actual Tim of Tim's Photos. That would be Tim Shields. We just happen to share the same first name and love of photography, and I would assume we probably both have the same love-hate relationship with editing photos like we all do. But we do have to do it, so why don't we go ahead and jump in. I'm going to look here at this particular photo. This is a photo that I took in Iceland back in 2013, and I'm going to hit the D key or click the develop module here to go into my develop mode. And I like this photo, and I think I do want to continue editing it, but before I start doing little details, I always make my major edits in Lightroom first. There are three major edits I want to do here. Now, I think there's obviously some exposure issues. It's a little bit dark in the foreground. I think the sky is a little bit dull. I also think that it is not level. I think it's a little bit off, so I'm going to correct the level of the photo by doing some straightening or cropping. And I also want to correct any kind of lens imperfections that might have occurred. So we're going to look at those first. Definitely the first thing I do anytime I go into Lightroom is to go to the basic module. And by the way, just a little tip, if you hold your command key down and click on any of the collapse or expand arrows here, it will collapse them all or expand them all. Now, it's great if you're looking for a particular module, but I tend to leave them all uncollapsed because that's the way I'm used to working. All right, so the first thing that I do is go into basic and I hit the auto tone. That is my first major edit on virtually every photo that I take because it adjusts the photo to where Lightroom thinks is the proper exposure. And this gives me a much better idea of whether this is a photo I'd like to keep or throw away. I love this photo, so I'm going to go ahead and continue to edit it. And I can continue to play with these sliders, but it's a little too early. I want to work on my major edits before any of the minor ones. So the next major edit is to go down to the lens correction module, remove any chromatic aberration, and enable profile correction. And what that profile correction is doing is that it's looking at the model of my camera based on the information in the raw file. It's also looking at the particular lens I'm using. This might be cut off on your screen, but it is the Nikon 2470. And it knows that there's certain amounts of pin cushioning and vignetting that could happen with that lens at the focal length I shot it. So it makes that correction for me. And if I turn it off here, you're going to notice that there's a little bit of vignetting in the corners. There is some barrel distortion in the middle. So if I click it again to turn it on, you'll see that it corrects those two things for me. And all I had to do was check a box. So I do that with virtually every one of my photos. Okay, so that is the second of the three major edits I like to make first. The third would be any kind of cropping. And in this case, like I mentioned, it's not quite level to my eye. And there's two ways for me to correct that. I can go to my crop tool and select it up here in the upper right, or just hit the R key. And I can use the straighten tool to draw a line that I think is level. And that's great if I have a visible horizon. Say I was taking a sunset picture or picture of a lake where I can actually see the horizon. I'm going to draw a very exaggerated straight line, but you'll see that just by dragging a line anywhere in the photo, Lightroom is going to go ahead and make that line level. So that's a great way to correct the level of your photos quickly. However, I don't have a horizon here to go off of, so I'm going to do this by eye, again just simply selecting the crop tool, holding my mouse to the upper right hand corner just outside of the photo, holding down the left mouse button and just moving it up and down until it looks level to my eye. And I think that's just about right, so we'll click the return key to accept that. So I think that's better. And now what I've done is I've cropped out any pixels that I'm not going to keep in the final image, so any editing that I do, I'm not going to be editing portions of the image that are going to be going away anyway. All right, so the major edits are done. Now it's time to do the minor edits. I certainly want to play maybe with some of the levels on the screen. I definitely want to get rid of these dust spots. Let's go ahead and play with the levels first. So here I can change these sliders. My favorite slider by far is the dehaze. And if I scroll to the right on the dehaze, you're going to see the sky come back. It is going to increase the contrast, and you can go too far with it. Certainly that is almost cartoonish in the amount of dehazing that I've done, and the colors are too saturated. So a little bit is fine. So again, I'll start at 0 and maybe move it up about 20 to 30. Somewhere in there seems about right. Okay, so again, there is off and there is on, and it does make quite a bit of difference. So play with that, but be very judicious with it. So here I can continue to play with the blacks, I can play with the shadows, do whatever I'd like there to make that photo look the way I want. All right, let's take a quick look at the histogram. This is a good place to stop and look up at the top of the window where we see this histogram here at the top, which is telling me where all of the detail lies in my photo. If you look at my mouse, I'm holding it over sections of the histogram, which you'll see this is the blacks section on the left. All the way on the right is the whites selection. As I move down here, we've got highlights, we've got exposure, which you might think of as the midtones, and we've got shadows, and again down to blacks. So the left side of the histogram is always going to be the darks in the photo, and I don't have too many darks in the photo. And the right side is going to be your highlights or your whites, and that obviously I don't have any there either. So this is a fairly well exposed photo. I don't think that the histogram is as important in editing than it is when you're out in the field taking pictures, because if your camera has the ability to show you the histogram of the photo you just took, take a look at it. Because if, for example, all of the histogram is bunched up in the left-hand side of the photo, it means that you're going to have a very dark photo when you open that in Lightroom or Photoshop or any editing tool. So you're losing data, and that means you might want to increase your exposure, maybe shorten your shutter speed, things like that, play with your ISO. Now, if it conversely is all the way up on the right, then of course you are overexposed. And again, you want to adjust your camera accordingly. To be honest, if you are going to do one or the other, if the situation where you're photographing calls for a difficult exposure, try exposing down rather than up. It is much easier to get detail back out of the darks than it is out of the lights. So you definitely want to go lower than you do higher. That's just a little tip that works with any camera and any editing tool. There's always more data in the shadows. Okay? Now, if I'm adjusting this, you've watched me actually just sort of take my mouse, single click on it, and move left and right on the exposure. I can move left and right on the shadows. What I'm doing there is no different than using the sliders down below. So take a look here. If I click the exposure section of my histogram, hold my mouse down and either move it left or right, the exposure slider is moving left and right. So I'm not doing anything different up here than I would be if I were simply changing the sliders. So that's why I say that it's not super important to be concerned about the histogram, because it's almost too late at this point. What you really want to do is be looking at the histogram when you're out in the field to make sure that the bulk of the data is somewhere in the middle of this histogram. Okay, so what else do I need to do? I certainly need to come in and get rid of these dust spots. So there is a spot removal tool, which I believe is the Q key. And I can select that and either do a clone or a heal. A clone will simply look at a similar portion of the image and clone it on top of it. A heal will sort of blend in similar tones and values. And to be honest, when I'm doing dust removal in the sky, they both work identically. So unfortunately, I had some oil on my sensor, which resulted in quite a few spots. So I'm going to go ahead and leave it on heal for now, and I can adjust the size of my brush using the slider or the mouse wheel on my mouse if you have one. And I just want to make it a little bit bigger than the dust spot. Click that once and it goes away. It's just removing all those spots wherever I don't want them. If I go to the clone, guess what? It really does pretty much the same thing. I'm going to go ahead and clone here. I don't see a difference there between clone and heal, so I'll continue to do this in either one. And frankly, I don't pay too much attention when I'm doing dust spot removal as to which brush I'm in, whether it's clone or heal. So I may miss one or two here. You guys are all looking at this and you're probably seeing dust spots that I might be missing. So I apologize if I do miss one or two, but We'll call that good for the sake of demonstration. Okay, so I've done almost all of my minor edits in addition to my major edits. The one thing I might want to do is bring up the tone of this grass. It looks a little underexposed, and if I try to bring up that exposure, it's going to bring up exposure on all of the image. So I want to tell Lightroom that I only want to adjust the grass. And I do that by painting a mask on the grass with my adjustment brush. So I'm simply going to hit K or select the adjustment brush. And here I can make my brush an appropriate size. And I'm just going to hit the O key on my keyboard. This is important. The O key will show you the mask overlay. And as you'll see now, as I'm painting, it's going to paint in red anything that I'm telling Lightroom I want to adjust. And I can take my finger off the mouse key and continue to add. If I miss anything, I can come back and add it later. So just build that until you're happy with the selection that you have. And here, there's actually a piece of the tree trunk. I don't want a line across the tree trunk where I adjusted the exposure or anything that I'm about to do. So I can hit the Option key to turn this into a negative brush. In this case, I'm going to bring it down to just about the size of the tree trunk, hit the Option key, and unmask, or I guess you'd call it painting over that tree brush, but really what I'm doing is erasing the mask, and I'm saying, don't adjust this. All right, so that's fine. That looks just about right. And now I've selected all of the grass. So I'm going to hit the O key to take off my overlay, and now I can come in and I can play with things like exposure. I might lessen my highlights, darken the blacks a little bit, play with the dehaze, play with the clarity until I like it. So it's up to you guys to decide where your photo looks good, but there's an idea of how you can just do a particular portion of the image. All right, so let's close that brush. I don't think there's anything else I can do here in Lightroom. It's time to sharpen the photo, and it's time to get rid of these handlebars and this big grassy knoll. So the only thing I need to do here is just right-click and say Edit in Photoshop. And I'm using Lightroom Classic CC and Adobe Photoshop CC 2018. So these subscription tools from Adobe for Photoshop and Lightroom. I pay $10 a month for this, which is less than the price of going out to eat by myself. So it's a great bargain to have both of those tools for just $10 a month. I like doing the subscription rather than buying them outright because I'm always using the latest version of those tools. So let's go ahead and bring this up on screen. And now that I'm in Photoshop, I can zoom in on this particular piece of the image, the handlebar. I'm going to hold the space key down and drag the photo where I want it to go. Now the content fill aware is what we're going to do here to get rid of this handlebar. In fact, we're going to use it to get rid of the red one as well. And what that does is it says to Photoshop, replace this with something you think should have been there. Now it is fine if I wanted to go and clone grass on top of that, but honestly it would take me a lot longer than the content aware fill. So what I do here is simply take the lasso and drag it roughly around the handlebar. I don't want to touch it. I want to give it a little bit of room and select it. All right, so that's the selection I'm going to have Photoshop fill in. If I don't want to see the selection lines, by the way, in case they just are getting in my way, they call these the marching ants, and you can turn off the marching ants by hitting Command H. It does not delete your selection or cancel it. It's still being selected. You're just not seeing the marching ants. Nice little tip. So I'm going to right-click on this selection and say Fill. And there are some options under here. I don't change any of them. I just leave it all at content aware. I don't change the color adaptation. I don't change any of the blending. I just simply say OK. And there we go. Photoshop just put grass where that handlebar was. Now, it's not perfect. I see a little bit of area here where it doesn't look quite right. So what I might do is go to my brush tool. And I do need to click Option on the brush tool because the brush tool is going to sample from a certain area. And let's use this area right here. And it's going to use that to compare where I'm healing, and it's going to just do a live heal of everything there. So that seems to look a little bit more natural. Now, obviously, I probably would play around with this a little bit. I might select from different areas to get nice random selections, but you're starting to see a much nicer image here without that handlebar. I'm going to undo that one. There we go. So we'll call that good for right now. Maybe a couple more spots. All right, so we'll grab that. Well, yeah, okay, there. So let's do the red handlebar. I'm simply going to drag around that. Again, right click, select fill, and hit OK. And I don't see anything I need to change there. Such a small area that it really didn't have much of effect. It just quickly filled that in. So let's give it one more test here. I'm going to move over to the right-hand side of the screen, and here's this big grassy knoll. Let me zoom out just a second and show you that I just think that this is distracting. I think it calls your eye to it, and it takes you away from the subject of the photo, which is really this row of houses, this great tree, and some of the cool clouds in the sky. So I'd like this to be a flat patch of grass. So instead of trying to do this with cloning, which again would take probably a long time, I'm going to lasso this, and again, roughly lasso it. All right, just like that. I'm going to right-click, select fill, and OK. It's going to think for a second since that's a larger portion of the image. And there we go. We now have grass. Now, it's, again, not perfect. These larger fills, I'm going to see a little bit of a line here where I did it. I see some repetition of some of the places on the document, or on the image rather, where it copied. So I'm going to go ahead to my heal. Again, I'm just going to sample from somewhere. I'm going to start healing over those places that don't look natural. Let's get rid of some of that here. Get rid of some of this there. I can even paste over where that line was, where I could see where I did that fill. And we're starting to get a little bit closer. Now, again, I'm probably going to play with this a little bit more, and you'll want to obviously take your time doing this, but that's the idea. I've gotten so much farther with this content-aware fill than I ever would with a clone stamp. In fact, I'm even going to take out some of the trash here with that heal tool. Okay, so let's zoom out. We now have something quite a bit better. And we're getting close. We're getting close. I really think I might want to make this a little bit bigger and heal some more of this, just because I'm a bit of a perfectionist. So, okay, we're getting a little bit better now. Okay, let's get rid of that color there. Okay, all right. So at this point, the last thing I want to do is quickly sharpen the image. And there are two ways that people typically sharpen in Photoshop. They go up to the filter menu, they select sharpen, and go to the unsharp mask. And that's been the way that I've always done it for a long time. I have used the unsharp mask numerous times. But now that I've learned how to use the high pass filter, I don't like the unsharpen mask very much. And let me show you why. If I turn on an unsharp mask and turn it way up, you're going to see that I get some fringing here on these branches. So there's off and there's on, and you see these white halos or fringes around this, and if you turn up your fringing, you're going to see that exaggerated. So even if you play with this quite a bit, it's just not giving me quite the sharpening that I like. So I'm going to cancel out of this and show you what I now like to do, which is the high pass filter. So what I'll do first is I need to copy the background layer. There are a couple extra steps with the high pass filter. Down below in the lower right hand corner, there is a create a new layer button. And I'm simply going to drag my background to that create a new layer, and it will create a copy of the background. And I want to apply my filter to that copy first. So here I'm going to go to filter, and instead of going to the sharpen menu, I'm going to go to other and go to high pass. And what this will do is it will show me just the portions of the image that it finds contrast in. And if I turn this way up, it's going to find a lot of the image. It's going to over sharpen like crazy. It's not going to look right, trust me. In fact, a little goes a long way. I have never gone above about 3.5 for some of my more soft images, and I don't think I would ever go below 1, otherwise the effect might be too minimal. This image seems to be good around 1.5, 1.6, something like that. So we'll go ahead and put it at 1.6 and click OK. Now that high pass filter is in there, but I do need to blend it on top of the background. So what I'm going to do here is go to my thumbnail of the background copy and double click it and simply blend that onto the background using an overlay. That's it. I click OK. Now this is actually a sharpened image. If I zoom in on it, you're going to notice these tree branches are quite a bit more sharp. Let me turn it off. There's the unsharp, and there's with the high pass filter sharpening. However, you are going to introduce some noise in your photo anytime you sharpen. Let me take a look over here on the right, and here is the top of this building with the high pass filter on and with it off. Now it is quite a bit softer with it off, but we have less noise in the sky. Turning it on brings back the sharpening, but it does increase noise. Now the good news is I'm going to reduce the noise in Lightroom, but be aware that anytime you sharpen, you will introduce noise, and anytime you do noise reduction, you'll soften your sharpening. So there is a tug of war and a push and pull between the two, so you have to find a good balance. So before I do that noise reduction in Lightroom, I do want to do one more thing, which is to flatten my image. Over on the right, you'll see a background and a background copy. That is making my file size dramatically larger. I don't need to save all of that data. I'm just simply going to flatten the image and merge all those layers down to one single layer. And all I have to do now is just hit File, Save, or Command S, and I have saved that photo. So here is the photo in Photoshop. And if I now go over to Lightroom and look at my gallery, you're going to see that I now have a second photo. We have the original RAW file, and then we have the edited TIFF file. The RAW file does not have the Photoshop adjustments. The TIFF file is the Photoshop adjusted file. So it creates a copy, which is great because you can work just on that. So we'll open that up and go to my Develop module. And the last thing I might want to do here is to simply come in and do a little bit of noise reduction. It's really not bad, but if I do zoom in, you can see a little bit of it. So I'm going to scroll down to my noise reduction. Again, I don't use the sharpening in Lightroom, but I'm going to turn noise reduction up maybe 25, 30. I don't want to soften the image. I do want to keep it sharp, but I do want to get rid of some of that noise, and that does look quite a bit better. So there we go. We have essentially a finished image, and that's just about it. The only thing I might do in this case, now that I'm looking at it, is to go back into my crop module. And I know I told you I don't like to edit things that I crop out, but in this case, I do think that the foreground has less interest. So if I look at this photo as it is, the story of this photo is in the sky and this tree and this really cool city street in Reykjavik, Iceland. But there's really little in the foreground that provides interest to the photo. So I think anytime that happens, I should probably crop it out. So I'm going to hit the R key and I'm going to crop the photo. And I'm going to do this a little bit too far. If I crop this too far, I just want to show you here. The subject, one of the subjects of this photo is the tree. And if I crop too close to the tree here, I'm right up against the bottom of the frame. And to my eye, that's a little uncomfortable. You want a lot of room, or at least a little bit of room, for your eye to roam around the subject. So I went a little farther. I probably want to back it up just a little bit, and that's going to look much better. So be careful with your crops not to get too close to your subject. Give it a little bit of space. And that's it. We have a completed photo. So that's the end of the video. Thank you guys so much for watching. This is the first time I've done a video. If you have any comments, positive or negative, please let me know. And if you want to see more, maybe I'll do more. So thank you so much. I hope you learned something, and good luck editing your photos.